There are a lot of things that we complain about in the mechanical consultant design of the building management system. And rightfully so. I used to complain about the exact same things. I'd read through the mechanical specification. When I got down to the BMS section, I'd always feel very disappointed by the lack of information that was in that part of the mechanical specification. But it wasn't until in around about 2014 when I started to transition out of BMS companies and into BMS consulting. And the first job that I had, I worked for a tier 1 global engineering services consultancy here in Melbourne. And there were about 100 engineers in the Melbourne office. There was mechanical, electrical, fire, hydraulics, security, acoustics, lifts, sustainability, the whole suite of engineering services. And over those few years, working with these engineers, I started to see the big picture of the problem and why these things were impacting on our industry, the BMS industry. So in today's video, I wanted to run through a few situations of things that cause us a lot of problems and explain to you why they happen and usually why it's not actually the mechanical engineer's fault that this happens. Now, running through this and you better understanding this isn't going to solve the problem. You're still going to go into the mechanical specification and there still might not be a points list at the back. And you might still read through and get to the section where it says the BMS shall integrate to the electric, water, gas and thermal meters, and they might not list exactly how many meters there actually are. So all these problems, they're still going to exist. But what I'm hoping is it will help you with two things. The first will be you might feel a little bit less frustrated. So when you get through the specification and something's in there that's not quite right, rather than feeling frustrated about it, you might be more understanding of it and think, oh well, yeah, I know why that is. So obviously if you feel less frustrated, that's probably going to help with your performance just and your general well-being anyway. The second part of it is if you think carefully about these problems and think carefully about why they exist, possibly you could put in some sort of a risk mitigation strategy to try and reduce the impact that it's going to cause on your deliverable, which is the BMS. It's not going to go away. It's still going to give you pain, but understanding the problems might help you look ahead and just be slightly more proactive rather than feeling upset about it. The sun came around my window when I was recording that intro and it was probably a bit too bright. That should be better. Okay, so I have about 5 things that I want to discuss, but I've just realized that that's going to take way too long. The video will run for too long and a lot of you will lose interest halfway through. So today I'm going to focus on the very first point, which I think is the point that frustrates BMS engineers the most. And then the second point in the plan, which might be next week or another week, is why does the mechanical consultant choose the lowest price, which is usually or often the wrong price. That's another video to look forward to. So today we're going to talk about design and construct, which we have discussed quite a lot last year, but I want to just go through that again and focus on a very particularly important point that I really need you guys to consider. So a long time ago, probably before a lot of your time, because I think a lot of the younger engineers with 10 years experience or less have only worked on design and construct projects. So a long time ago, before that, the mechanical consultant or the consultants, they did the entire design, like everything. And all the trades had to do was build exactly what the consultant specification and drawing said. And then I guess at some point, there's a various bunch of reasons why the DNC model came about, but it was just the client decides how much of the design and construct split they want the consultant to do. So rather than the consultant do the entire design like they used to, the consultant has been asked to reduce a whole lot of the stuff they would normally do and do less design, and therefore their fees are less. So for example, if we have a 50-50 split, so it's 50% DNC, the consultant is only being paid to do half of the design. So mechanical contractors, they would normally spend, hundreds of hours with their mechanical engineers finishing off half of the design. In fact, they actually do the whole thing usually. On premium grade projects, often the mechanical contractor will actually recheck the consultant's 50% design to find ways that they can sort of have smaller chillers or draw in less outside air, and they recheck all the heat load calculations and things. So mechanical contractors will often, at least in Australia, will recheck the consultant's 50%, and then they will design the second half, the 50%. In my opinion, in the BMS industry, I don't think we do that. We still seem to expect the consultant to provide the entire design, and this is why we're often getting frustrated. So if you're reading the mechanical specification, do not be surprised and do not expect to find a detailed point schedule. The consultant was asked not to do that. They were asked to do 50% or 40% or 30% of the design. I sometimes sort of consider it that the consultant is sometimes just doing the concept of what the design is, and then the trades have to further develop the concept into a fully coordinated working design. So do not expect to find comprehensive, well thought through control strategies or control sequences that explain how all the systems work together. The consultant was asked not to do that. Do not expect to find floor plans with the VAV boxes and temperature sensors, the correct locations provided for you. Don't expect to find that. The consultant's 50-50 design stops somewhere, and let's say it stops at the VAV. So they draw the ductwork off the riser, they put the VAV there. They don't draw the flexible ductwork and the diffusers. They don't do that. Mechanical is going to finish that off, and they don't put temperature sensors on there because you, as the BMS company, under your responsibility of the 50% of the consultant's design that you have to do in BMS world, you've got to do that. I find it really frustrating when I see BMS companies send off RFIs, request for information, via the builder, asking the consultant to please provide the location of all the sensors. Like, that's a bit cheeky because they're doing 50% of the design and you're doing 50% of the design. That part is your responsibility. And that's why often those RFIs get ignored. The mechanical engineer gets the RFI, is like, why are you asking me this? That's your responsibility to do that. So don't send an RFI off that's not going to get answered, because I just see BMS companies always just waiting. It's almost like we start a job, we just fire off 30 RFIs, the exact same ones we always do. We just fire them off to cover ourselves, and they get ignored, and you just keep saying, look, Mr. Builder, here's a list of outstanding RFIs. They haven't been answered. How many meters are there? Where are the water meters? Blah, blah, blah. Where are these drawings? They're not going to get responded to because they weren't paid to do that part of the design. That's your responsibility to do that part of the design. So let me ask you a question. The job you're working on right now as the BMS engineer, or the job you did last year, or the year before that, or the year before that, or the year before that, what was the D&C split on those projects? Was it a 70-30 split, a 50-50 split, a 30-70 split? What was the split? I bet you don't know, because we don't think like that. And I'll just go one step further on that discussion. I would assume, and I'm completely guessing here, that BMS companies, in their cost estimate, where they've worked out, the $1 million fee to do the job, I bet you there is an entry in there called Designer Construct, where they've got a percentage or a number that they factor in there. Because surely, if it's a 70-30, where you're doing 30% of design, surely if the split's further over and it's a 50-50, surely you have to do more design. As the BMS engineer, you have to do more design in a 50-50 split compared to when the split's only 30. So in the perfect world, just technically talking it through, your cost estimate should have an allowance of extra design hours, 100 hours, 500 hours, that allows for whatever the design and construct split is. I don't think we do that. We still think that the consultant should do the whole thing. We haven't sort of put two and two together. Everybody else has. Mechanical and electrical, they are employing consulting engineers to work for them to finish the rest of the thing off. We don't do that. So stop for a second and think about, of all the things that we complain about that frustrate us, and that frustrated me as well. I only worked this out, obviously, within the last 5 or 6 years. How many of those things that we complain about, that we put very unprofessional posts on LinkedIn, like dissing the consultant, how many of those things that are winding us up are actually our responsibility in the DNC split? Think about it. Most of them are, actually. Now, I'm not saying that because you can't resolve some of the gaps. So if you don't know how many electric meters there are, or water, gas, thermal, you can't just invent that. But here's the point. Sometimes, if you want to work out how many electric meters there are, under your DNC responsibility and the electrical contractor's responsibility, you've got to collaborate together months in advance and close that gap. So rather than sending an RFI that says, please tell me all the electric meters, Mr. Consultant, which is going to go nowhere, rather send an email to the builder to say, please could you coordinate or arrange some coordination workshops between us, the BMS, and the other trades, and you get off your chair and go sit down with the electrical contractor and say, look, how many lighting and power boards do you have? How many main switch boards do you have? Where are they? And you spend an extra 100 hours in your design phase working with the rest of the team to close that gap in the DNC model. Go and sit down with a hydraulics contractor. Where are the water meters? The hydraulic contractor will probably say to you, I don't know. The hydraulic consultant's specification doesn't actually tell me, the hydraulics contractor, where the water meters are. DNC, right? So they've got to go work that out first. So you say, okay, fine, I'll come back to you in 2 or 3 weeks, but just be aware that I need to know where the water meters are so I can start running my cables and do my design. There's a lot of effort to do here. On a very, very big project, a consultancy that does all services, mechanical, electrical, fire, the whole thing, they could have $1 million fee to do a big hospital, like $1 million fee. So if their fee is $500,000, they're not doing those things. You have to have more money in your thing. Now, it's hard to win jobs as it is. So I'm not saying that you're going to say to your boss, listen, hold on a sec, I need an extra 100 hours on this big project to close out the DNC gap. That's not going to happen. But you have to sort of realize that you winding yourself up isn't going to help, because that's not how things work. Next week, if I get around to it, because this is Sunday, I will explain to you the story about, because I'll just tell you quickly, right? In Eastern Australia, the mechanical consultant is no way involved at all in the tender. So we don't know who's getting the job. We don't know what the prices are. We'll talk more about that later on.